Hello and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast. As you can see in the description, we've got a guest today. And Steve, I would love for you actually to introduce yourself. But before we do that, tell me, how's your week been?
I've had a good week, Danette. I'm actually in Wellington, New Zealand, where I live most of the time.
Nice.
But I've just spent the previous weekend with my family in Sydney and looking after a couple of grandkids. So that was great.
Oh, how beautiful. How old?
The two that were with me, I've got six grandchildren actually.
Wow.
They're between 6 and 12 now, so it's a fantastic age. And the two that were with me were 7 and 9.
Oh, how gorgeous. What a
Yeah,
wonderful way to spend the weekend.
it was
And
great.
I love Wellington. It's one of my favourite cities.
It
So
is. It's a cool small town, So it's like a really good place to live and
yeah.
a lot going on here.
Yes, it's gorgeous. So, Steve, would you like to introduce yourself and particularly share a little bit about your journey before we get into your book?
Yeah, well, look, I was born in Sydney. My parents actually were Hungarian refugees. I'm the oldest of four kids. I went to public school, St Ives Central and then Coringa High School,
Nice.
north of Sydney. My dad worked for IBM, so I was fortunate to be able to do a couple of years of high school in the US when my dad was transferred to New York. And that was a pretty significant experience in the ages 14 to 16. That was quite a framing experience for me and the way my life has panned out. I studied civil engineering at the University of New South Wales, and um, I didn't follow the engineering path. Probably fortunately, I built a retaining wall at home that collapsed in a heavy downpour. So the world was saved from my engineering talents. I joined IBM, followed my dad into IBM, had a good 14 years there, but that really was the beginning of a 40-year career in technology. And in a sense, the way I frame it is lived in a number of different places, working for different technology companies, and been very fortunate to work in some of the best places at the worst of times. And that's really helped frame a lot of what I've come to believe and also practice in fast changing and unpredictable times.
And Steve and I were just talking before we hit record about open mindset and that. And so that leads beautifully into Steve's book, Through Shifts and Shocks. And this is I love the book because there are a lot of really great stories, but there's also some really good science. And I just love your framework, Steve, around how we navigate this. And obviously, with 40 years of experience, you've got a little bit of experience. And I love that you said that it was through hard times because they're often the great teachers. So tell us a little bit about your book and particularly the key elements that you focus on in your book.
Yeah, look, I think what I've come to believe through everything I've experienced is that change is hard for people. And
Yeah.
that meaningful change, a lot of change happens through collaboration and teamwork. And a lot of teams people are working on are not performing to their potential. So the book evolved around that sort of core challenge
Mm.
or problem that we face in accelerating and unpredictable times. And so the view of that particular challenge is through the eyes of a CEO, a people leader, so someone who leads a team, someone who's involved in a change initiative and wanting it to be successful, could be anybody, and then members of teams. So there's something in it for everybody. But if you said to me, who am I really appealing to? I'm really appealing to people who lead teams because their approach to doing that has such a significant impact on the willingness of people around them to change and the
Yes.
effectiveness of any change that they're trying to promote.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Um, I have to diverge from our questions for a sec because I read your story last night about your dad and how he taught you about diversity and inclusion. And I would love for you to share that with the listeners because I had a good laugh, but also I was like, that's such a great lesson that your dad taught you. And I know he's taught you a number of great lessons.
Yeah, look, I think my father really was, I'd call a humanist. And what
Yes.
I mean by that is he lived through some pretty awful things and times, but he always believed that people were good and people deserved opportunity. So as a father of a daughter, he was a great influence, and no greater than when my brother and I were playing in the backyard and our sister Karen wanted to join in. And one of us, I can't remember whether it was me or John, said, "You can't play because you're a girl." And suddenly the back door banged open and Dad came running down the stairs and out in the garden. He grabbed us. He grabbed us by the collars. He pulled our faces right into his and he said, "If you ever tell her she can't do what you can do, I'll kill you. Do you understand me?" And, that was my first lesson in gender equity, and one I've never forgotten. And my sister, by the way, is a specialist endocrinologist and has a great career, 5 gorgeous kids. Very proud of her.
Isn't that wonderful? When I read it, I just laughed and I was like, that is such a great way. And it explains how you've approached diversity and inclusion from then. And such, for your dad to be back then really aware of that. It's so wonderful that he shared that with you. I bet you wouldn't have liked that particular way, but it was a really good lesson. So I
Yeah.
just had to share that because I love how you've sort of peppered the book with those stories as well, not just the work ones. So I'm really curious, what do organisations get wrong around particularly priorities and alignment?
I love the question because they don't prioritize and they're not aligned. That's,
Tell us more.
and look, I think that's a bit facetious, but you know what? It's kind of true that prioritization and alignment, I think, operationally, are the hardest things you face in business or anything that you're trying to do with a group of people. Because everybody's got their ideas and they're good people with good ideas. But the problem is if you don't prioritize, then you do a little bit of everything and nothing well.
Yep.
Prioritization, and look, Steve Jobs there's a wonderful YouTube video with Steve Jobs basically saying prioritization is saying no. It's not saying yes. It's
Yeah.
about what you say no to.
Yep.
So saying no to good ideas is ultimately what prioritization comes down to. That's why it's hard.
Yep.
And the benefits of doing it are fantastic. They really are but you won't discover the benefit of doing fewer things better unless you really commit to it because it takes a lot of discipline. It's not easy. I've always found it really, really hard. And as a CEO, I would say it's the hardest challenge I've faced
Yep.
because your people also look to you to prioritize because they know there's too much going on and that things aren't going as well as they could. The other is alignment. Now, alignment's really interesting because I was taught how to do strategy, and you can read a lot of books on strategy. It's pretty much common sense, but there's a discipline to it and you can follow it. Similarly, I was taught how to give people job objectives and to review them, performance reviews. What I was never taught and never really had a discipline around until I was in my 40s, and I was taught by an external consultant when I was at Microsoft, is alignment as a process. Alignment as a process is how do we take the few things that are most important to us to change, break them down into really specific actions that affect every layer of our organization. Now, if you're in a small organization, it might just be really being clear to anyone who works with you what a change initiative means to their everyday experience at work. And in a big organization, it's quite a complex process. It's a challenging process because you've got to cut through for the middle management because I really get upset when people talk about the frozen middle in large organizations. They're only frozen because the leaders of the organization have failed to do their job, which is to break their intentions down into what they expect middle management and then their people to do. The reason why that's so important is that if you don't have that conversation with the middle management layer by layer, the change initiative will be drowned out by what they do every day. And you have to be able to say to them, when they say to you that they don't have the resources, you have to be able to say to them, well, what else are you doing? How important is that relative to this? And if they have a compelling argument, you say, well, we need to find you more, or we need to give you permission not to do some of those other things. But you have to get into the detail. That's what alignment
Mm.
is. That's why it's challenging.
Mm. And Steve, so then that sparks another question in me. A lot of what I'm seeing at the moment is organizations asking their people to do more with less. And I wonder how that disrupts what you're talking about, because it then seems like it scatters the resources rather than brings them into alignment and makes sure that we're focusing on the few key priorities.
Yeah, do more with less is one of those kind of unfortunate. It's like fail often, fail fast. Like okay, what? See again, unless you get into the detail, it's kind of just a tagline. And so,
Yeah.
yes, doing more with less is about being more efficient.
Yeah.
But then, and this kind of does go to a bit about what I hoped for my book, is the challenge is how.
Yeah.
How do I do that? Like, thanks, boss. Do more with less. Okay. Do you have an interest in how I can do that? Because if you don't, it's a tagline. If you actually show genuine interest in
Yeah.
how that might be done, it's very different.
Yeah.
So, in my book, I really tried to share all the hows that I know,
Yes.
the why and
Yeah.
the what, but how do you do that? And it really, again, you've got to get into the detail because otherwise it's just simple to say, hard to do.
Yeah, yeah, I love that answer. So my next question is, what is it? What do organisations need to put in place to embrace disruption and lead through change? Because obviously we're experiencing a lot of that at the moment, and it's only going to get faster.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think be very careful. The word disruption is a negative word, and it does play into this
Hmm.
change that's happening to us, whether it's technology change or one of the many other things that have happened to us through the pandemic and the changes to workplace expectations now as well. I think having trying to get through the negative to the positive, which is, okay, so what are we going to do about it? What's the opportunity for us? Because really, technology does amplify the possibilities your people and you have to do different things. I mean, it's pretty profound, but I always say that when I entered the workforce, my sources of knowledge were Dad, Encyclopedia Britannica, and smart people at work around me. Whereas now it's endless, really endless in terms of what information. And similarly, my connection with others is now amplified as a result of technology. So you've got to look at it as a opportunity. So the first thing I always say is it comes down to really your mindset and the being, who the people are that are involved. Are they open-minded where they need to be? Because the thing about being open-minded is not a constant state. There are times in your workday where you've got to be, let's say, very disciplined, controlled, don't make mistakes, know what you're doing. It could be preparing your financial accounts. It could be safety practices. Those things require discipline and a mindset that's in control, doesn't make mistakes, and knows what's going on. But that mindset doesn't work when you're confronted with change. So you have to have an open mindset. And to have an open mindset and know when you're applying the right one, you need to be self-aware. So a lot of this is about the mindset you bring to a situation. Are you observing yourself in action and your impact and observing the impact you have on others when they're trying to deal with change? And are you helping those people also get through the process? So that's part of it. The other is what you do and what you say. And there's a lot to that. We've already covered a couple of really important areas, being clear, being aligned, and reviewing how things are going. And then at the heart of it, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, is the ability to have the hard and difficult conversation around prioritization, around alignment, around performance. So it's a number of things. And in my book, I've tried to break it down to 8 must-do things, which really, for me, have bubbled up over the years to be the things I keep in mind when I'm facing change and really trying to bring people on the journey with me.
Mm. I love that, Steve. And Steve, you talked when I used the word disruption and that negative connotation, and you flipped it. And I love the part in the chapter that talked about victim versus the leadership language to be able to reframe, this is happening to me versus, sorry, this is happening to me versus this is happening for me. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that, because I am noticing people are sort of using the language that's keeping them stuck more often than is giving them that open-mindedness. And I suppose with open-mindedness, we're more aware as well.
Yeah, look, the experience that brought victim leader to me was at Microsoft Australia when we were trying to change the culture. And we had a couple of things in our culture that we specifically identified we wanted to change. The victim leader one came from the fact that a lot of people were paralyzed and wouldn't do things because they thought the corporation in the US wouldn't let us do it. And that things were the way they were because other people had made them that way. So you'd hear language that was really quite defeated, disempowered. So we had a company called Axilent back then. They were a consulting firm, come in and help us run these workshops where we would recognize victim behavior and language versus leader. And we used the example of being stuck in traffic. I'm sorry I'm late, but the traffic was awful. And gee, I hope the council gets voted out at the next elections because they haven't fixed up the traffic issues. And that's the victim, which is I'm helpless.
Yep.
Whereas the leader way of looking at it is to say, look, I'm sorry I'm late. I really should have left earlier given the roadworks going on. You take accountability, you take ownership, even though you didn't cause the problem. And I love that the way it lands is you are response able. So you're not responsible, you're response able. You
I
can
love that.
Yeah, you can respond.
Yeah.
So the point about this, though, I think just to finish on it, is to say we're human. When bad things happen, we do feel victimized. It's completely natural. But if you're self-aware, you'll realize that staying in that state isn't going to get you anywhere. And you can snap out of it and go, okay, I'm upset, this happened. Now what can I do about it? How do I take responsibility and make this better or learn from it? And that had a profound effect on our organization because even people, when they were having that emotional reaction, would say, I'm having my victim moment, just let me get through it. I'm going to get on to being a leader in a minute. And that was
That's awesome.
really helpful. So it is one of the how-tos I talk about.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm curious, if someone was starting out, what would be your key two or three pieces of advice that would set them up for success, given our world is changing?
Yeah, there's so many sort of things, but I would say work with people you can learn from and trust. I think that's a foundation of so much of your work life. And, it applies to all our lives. You want to be surrounded by people that you can learn from and trust. So that's definitely my number one. After that, there's a few. I think one for me right now is because I'm sort of more at the tail end than I am at the beginning of my career, is the journey is the reward. And that was a quote from John Scully, who took over from Steve Jobs at Apple many years ago. It was the title of his book, I think, The Journey is the Reward, or it's a saying that came out of it. And that is really just appreciate where you are now and appreciate that whilst things might be tough, those things that are tough will be the things you look back on in the future as being the most rewarding experiences. This story comes to mind. I'm on the driveway at St Ives Liquorland as a uni student. It's late in the week. I've been working long hours and I'm tired and I want the week to end. This truck pulls up with a massive number of pallets of beer and wine to unload. I looked at this thing and my arms dropped and I think my whole body sagged. Out pops the driver, who's a short, stocky guy. He jumps out, he looks at me and he goes, son, think of it as something that's going to make you a better man. And that just immediately just had impact on me, I thought, yeah, okay, let's unload this thing.
Yep.
So just remember the journey is a reward, and those tough times are going to be things that you'll look back on and appreciate more than anything.
Love that. And Steve, I'm curious, because we're sort of coming to the end, but I want to have lots more conversations with you. But let's talk a little bit about self-awareness. And because what I love about your book is it is so practical. So it has those hows that we can take away and really go, I can put this into place. But self-awareness is one of those things that is difficult to do because a lot of our brain happens, subconsciously, etc. What are the key things that helped you build your self-awareness?
Yeah, Danette, it's a really good point you make, and it's probably an area of the book where I say the what rather than the how.
Yeah.
And that's because I think it's a very personal thing. But first of all, being self-aware is much more easily said than done, because the way we are as human beings, for a whole range of really important reasons, puts things into automatic mode very quickly after we've learnt them. And so 95% of the time, according to some of the numbers I've seen around, we are operating from the subconscious. We're on automatic. So to be present, to be self-aware, you have to move out of that mode into the 5% where you're really conscious. And then being conscious is a process that each of us might do differently. So you might decide that every day you're going to make breaks where you go for a walk, take a breath so you can think and separate yourself from everything going on. You'll also develop potentially different strategies for responding when you know you're in the wrong mode. So when I used to see things that were new and I'd go, that's really stupid. And then down the track, I'd realize they weren't. They were significant. And so now that's happened to me so often that whenever I say the word stupid, my mind immediately says, my conscious says, I jump into conscious mode and this voice says, Steve, you've been wrong so often before. Take a look at it, really understand it before you draw conclusions. So
I love that.
it's a little thing I've got going now that works for me. Um, I do, and breath work is another thing that I've learned that is amazing in how it can help you sleep and switch off from the pressures of the moment. So there are some good resources around. We didn't talk about this, but there's a book by Nicole LaPera called The Work.
Yes.
That
Yes.
I think is an exceptional book because it doesn't just help you with this particular domain, but also helps you deal with the bad things that have happened to you that affect you in your subconscious, and they flare up at the times you really least want them to.
Yep.
So there's plenty of great resources out there now that didn't exist, 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Yep.
So really understanding who you are and also being kind to yourself, it's all part of this. Really appreciate you are human. You're only human. It's not easy
Yes.
being human in the face of change and uncertainty. It's not meant to be. That's the way we're made up, to be able to be on alert and deal with it. But do invest the time to find your way so that moment between something impacting you and your reaction can be the best version of you rather than one you regret after.
Oh, I love that advice. So, Steve, now you talked about books because I love my books. What would be, say, your top three books that you would say to people? And obviously, we'd start with yours because yours is actually really, I love yours.
Yeah.
What are perhaps three others that you would recommend to people really to grow themselves, to be able to navigate through change or be self-aware or whatever you reckon are your top three?
Or I would say, look, there's a book called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, which to me is a really, really good book. It's easy to read.
Yeah.
And Patrick Lencioni's written that, and his books are very good. Like The
Yes.
Advantage is another good one. The books that I've read recently that are taking me more, it's interesting. The element of being human and being self-aware. If I'd have written the book 10 years ago, that probably wouldn't have featured. It would have been more about
Yeah.
what you do rather than about who you are. But
Yes.
the last 10 years have really sort of helped me see the importance of all of that. So Do the Work by Nicole LePera is a really interesting one that people might pick up and say, well, I don't really know this is for me, but boy, there are people I know that could benefit.
Yeah.
Did get a kick out of reading The Myth of Normal. I'm not sure if you're
Yes,
across.
I've heard of that one. Yep.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's a little bit sobering because so much of what we think is normal in the way we're living and working isn't really, let's say, totally aligned with being the creatures we are, the humans we
Mm,
are. So that's a fascinating book. And look, it's really hard for me. I think in the back of my book, there's actually a list of great
yes.
books,
Yes, there is.
and there's so many I've read that I've learned from. So I'd probably
Nice.
leave it at that for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, one more question before I get to the what else would you like to share? But I'm really curious because one of the things that I noticed in your book was around listening. And it's such a critical skill, and yet we're not taught how to do it. So I'd love for you to sort of share a little bit more around your thoughts around listening to others and yourself as well, I would imagine.
Isn't that funny, Danette, that we don't get taught to listen and we don't get taught to breathe? Now that's changing, by the way, because the
Thank
young,
goodness.
I know my grandkids are being exposed to these things much more than I was.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, the listening's super important because another principle of being a human that is good at change and working with others through change is caring about people. There's a great saying, if you want people to think you care, you have to care. I always pause on that one because it's pretty profound. But the best way that I know to show someone you care about them is to listen to them, particularly in the work context. It's really important because you learn so much. I've found that there are no meetings now when I'm approached to meet people that are a waste of time. There's always something you'll learn from somebody else. So listening is really at the heart of care. It's at the heart of really understanding and learning. So being a good listener, Oscar Trimboli's written a lot on this, and Oscar is an old Microsoft mate of mine as well. So his book and his approach to improving your listening skills is definitely worth understanding and having a look into.
Nice. So, what else would you like to share with our listeners and our viewers before we wrap up for today? This has been such a great conversation, by the way, Steve.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Great questions and enjoyed your thoughts too. Look, I would say after 40 years of seeing every technology wave of change since the mainframe,
Yes.
I would say that change is a human thing much more than a technology thing.
Yeah.
Technology doesn't innovate yet. And I know, yes, you can use AI now to create some combinations of things, a football and an animal, and it'll come up with something for you. But you still need a human there to be inspired to ask or to create.
Yeah.
So the
Yes.
human element matters more than ever, the more that technology is in our hands. So I would say the simple thing is it's all about people. And no matter how much time you spend in your work life or any part of your life, connecting with people, helping people, understanding people, it's not an area we spend enough time on or prioritize enough.
Yeah.
If we really prioritized it more, we wouldn't allow people who are bad managers to stay people managers in their organizations.
Yeah.
We would say the most important thing is to be a good manager of your people. And if you're not good at it or getting good at it, we'll let you go back to being a full-time professional, doing what you're good at.
Yeah.
So we just have to realize that the human element matters more, and we just have to spend more time connecting with people, listening to people, helping others through change. And we benefit from that. When COVID
Mm.
hit, I couldn't tell Xero people around the world, and there were 4,500 of them. I couldn't tell them what to do. I had to say to them and trust them by saying, do the best you can. And all I could do was make sure I was connected to them, listening to them, and helping them. So in changing times, that's what matters most. It's the people, it's the human element.
Yeah, I love that. That's great advice. So, Steve, I'm pretty sure that people will want to reach out to you and connect with you and perhaps even have conversations with you. So, where is the best place that they can find you or places?
Well, it's definitely LinkedIn right now is very
Yes.
active. So Steve Vamos at LinkedIn. And I think on my LinkedIn page now, there's a website as well,
Nice.
stevevamos.com. And on that website, we'll be starting to build out some of the resources from the book so people can get access to those as well. So
Awesome.
they would be what I think are the best ways to tap in.
And of course, they should be reading your book, Through Shifts and Shocks.
Yeah.
Fabulous book, very practical.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Danette. It's been
You're
great talking.
welcome. You too, Steve. So thank you so much for coming and joining us. And to our listeners and our viewers, have a magical week.